Am I Racist? Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire's new movie.
Sometimes you have to be bold and call out things for what they are. And I think that is what Matt did.
He's kind of playing along to expose it, but he didn't have to really do anything. He just allowed it to be exposed.
This whole anti-racism narrative is actively regressing us towards the before Martin Luther King era, the era before civil rights.
You can judge based on the content of their statements who's who. At best, they're charlatan. At worst, they are just pure evil.
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Thomas is piping in via the internet today. We're all fancy technologically like that. Our topic today is Am I Racist? Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire's new movie that's hitting theaters. It just came out. We're going to be talking about it. We'll tell you what we think. But first, we are the Pop Culture Contrarian, as you know. Like and subscribe, leave a comment, tell your friends about us. Just try to boost us on all the socials that you can, all the different platforms, Spotify, iTunes, all sorts of stuff. And make sure to give us a like.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. So Am I Racist? This new hit movie from Daily Wire.
The answer
racist.
is yes, if you ask the DEI experts.
Yes. And the very simple way to tell is, what color is your skin? You're racist if it's white, which you might say that's racism itself, and you'd be right, but not according to them.
Yes. So let's consult the internet's favorite curmudgeon, Mr. Matt Walsh himself.
Yes.
Fantastic movie. What did you think, Sterling?
I liked the movie. It definitely mocks people who deserve to be mocked. There are absolutely laugh out loud funny moments. There's a lot of awkwardness, which is, I think, deliberate. But, you know, I'm not a huge fan of awkwardness, even when it is deliberate.
Yeah. You know, the question of mocking people, that is a tough one sometimes because we don't want to be mean-spirited for the sake of being mean-spirited. But in the case of people who deserve it,
yeah,
you know, there's a difference. And oftentimes, I think it's a Spurgeon quote that says, bold-hearted men are often called mean-spirited. That's a paraphrase. But, you know, sometimes you have to be bold and call out things for what they are. And I think that is what Matt did in this case in his own unique, humorous fashion. Yeah. And also, I will say, very cringeworthy fashion because it's a cringy film.
Yeah. I mean, I think in how you define mocking, or in this case, all he effectively did was allowed them to mock themselves, as it were. He's just exposing them. He's not putting words in their mouth. What you could say the main mockery from his point of view is basically playing along. It was cringeworthy because what people are being told should make you cringe because it was ludicrous. I mean, a lot of it was just ludicrous, and yet people are kind of taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that's the element that makes, I mean, it brings in the humor because it's so ridiculous. That's what's funny about it, because it's so ridiculous. It was, all he's doing is kind of playing along to expose it, but he didn't have to really do anything. He just allowed it to be exposed. I mean, there was a few things.
It's not like he tricked him.
Right. At the dinner when he drops the plates at certain points and everything.
That was
so awkward.
It takes a special, like, I'm kind of like with you, Sterling. I couldn't do that around people knowing that I'm trying to basically expose them. And so I'm playing along. And not only does he get them in a position to record them saying these crazy things, but that he like runs with it to a point where it almost to the point where I'm like, how do these people not think, wait a second, something's going crazy here?
Well, I think,
and they did in that one scene.
I think in several scenes they're like, hang on, this guy's something's weird.
Yeah.
But they've already said, you know, the damning thing that they believe. And that's something I noticed throughout is it's not just that you're laughing at this because it's funny. Sometimes you're laughing at it because if you believe what these people say, if you act on what these people are telling you, It's horrible. It's absolutely a horrible way to live your life. It's a horrible way to treat other people. It's a horrible way to view the world around you. And so you're laughing kind of to avoid crying almost sometimes with the way these people are talking.
Yeah. And I think to give a little bit of context for people who haven't seen the movie and for people who might not be familiar with Matt Walsh, the whole film starts out with him exploring this whole DEI racist stuff, just asking questions. And he did the same thing with a previous movie called What is a Woman?
Yeah.
And asking the question, what is a woman? This time he's asking himself, am I a racist? And he begins as himself, Matt Walsh, being an interviewer and a media person as he is. But quickly he discovers that people know who he is and consider him a disruptor, you know, of some sort. And he decides he has to go in disguise. And so he actually disguises himself very much like one of the professors in the previous film whom he interviewed, which was kind of hilarious, and then goes about asking all these DEI experts their opinion about how do we frame this question.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was brilliant how he exposed what it takes to become a DEI expert.
Oh, yeah. Just like going on a website and paying a little money and getting a card.
I think he said it was like a 30-minute course to get his certification as a DEI expert.
The fact that he like printed it out and laminates it and runs around showing everyone his certificate.
One thing that was striking to me, though, on that subject were all of the professionals who have PhD ahead of their name. One in particular, this was the first woman he interviewed, talking about Disney princesses. And this really kind of hit home to me because I have a young daughter who enjoys Disney princesses. And so this woman was talking about the whiteness of Disney princesses and dissuading girls from liking the white ones. Girls should be encouraged to like the Disney princesses of color.
Yeah.
And the example that Walsh uses is Moana. One of his daughters really likes Moana. My daughter happens to love Moana and runs through the house singing and pretending to be her all the time. And Moana's a Pacific Islander character.
Yeah.
Matt asks this person, so it's going to be Halloween soon, and my daughter wants to dress up like Moana. Would that be cultural appropriation? And she said yes. So in the same frame of thought, this woman is telling Matt, you can't let your daughters like the white ones.
Yeah.
They have to like the ones of color, but they're not allowed to imitate them because that's cultural appropriation. And Matt's like, well, we're just coming back around to the same question here. And then it's left with, there is no answer.
Yeah. As far as this, it's clear throughout that according to these anti-racist educators who have things like PhDs in sustainability, I defy you to tell me what the heck that means. But these people basically believe that being white is the original sin, and there's nothing you can do to wash that away, and there's nothing you can do to ever in their eyes redeem yourself, even as a 4-year-old little girl who likes Disney princesses. If you like the wrong ones, you're bad. If you like the right ones too much, you're still bad. Yeah. It's just
well, somehow you're bad. You're even worse if you're not trying to redeem yourself, even though you can't redeem yourself.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they talked about that. We watched an interview with the director where he's talking about an interview that didn't make it in the movie about how someone like the three of us who say, no, we aren't racist. We don't judge people based on the color of their skin. That's actually the most racist.
Yeah.
And a step above that is the KKK member with, the swastika tattoo. He's a step less racist because he's at least openly racist. So being openly racist is better than saying, no, I'm not racist, I'm colorblind.
Right.
It's just absolutely ludicrous, this whole ideology.
Well, it's a recipe for disaster if people actually were to take it seriously, because if you're communicating to white people, especially white kids growing up, that they're inherently racist, which is what they're communicating. I mean, that whole thing where they went around about the word inherent, and then she ended up saying, no, I don't. Okay, yeah, it's inherent.
Yeah.
You're conditioning people to basically say, well, then this must be my nature. And if it's my nature, well, then why do I fight it?
Yeah, why should I change my nature? Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point.
That's the logical result of that. And so you're actually, and this is like what we've repeatedly noted about this anti-racism is all it is pushing racism against whites. That's all it is. And all it's going to result in or fuel is racism on all parts.
Yeah.
Because if you're being told you're irredeemable because you're of this race and all the other races are somehow better because they're not the same race as you, well, then you're going to resent it and resent them just because they're a different race. And then vice versa, they're going to be taught and they're going to resent you because you're supposedly the worst race.
Well, anti-racism narrative is actively regressing us towards the before Martin Luther King era, the era before civil rights. That's what this is actively moving us towards, where I'm in my camp because of my skin color and you're in another camp because of your skin color, and we can't be friends because we have different skin colors. And that's actively what they're pushing towards.
I think another theme that played out through the movie that I thought was interesting was he's kind of harping on the fact that what is the underlying motive for these anti-racist gurus? And he kept showing how much money they would pay to have these sessions or interviews with these different folks. I think the highest was like $50,000.
Yeah, I think that was the person with the PhD in sustainability. I think that's who that was.
Which one? Who was that? I can't even remember who that was.
The name, I believe the person who was $50,000 was Sarah Tekala, who uses they, them pronouns, in case that's important.
Was that the one? Was she the one that was in like from Phoenix area or Arizona who had the famous video run-in with the two white guys who were sitting in supposedly?
Yeah, I think that's the same person. There's quite a few different anti-racist educators in the movie, so it's a little hard to keep them all straight, but I think the person you're thinking of is Sarah Tekala, yeah.
She was the most expensive, really. I mean, she had the least amount of anything to say.
Yeah. Well, none of them had anything real to say.
They really didn't.
I know, but I'm just imagining you paid $50,000.
Yeah.
Good night.
And I think that element of this film was one of the most important elements. And that is, this is the price tag for these people. And it really exposes them for who they are. And that is charlatans.
Yeah.
They're con men. They are basically charging for a fantasy situation where you just get, masochism. It's like racist masochism against white people that you pay for. And so at best, and you can judge those who go and see the film. You can judge based on the content of their statements, who's who. At best, they're charlatan. At worst, they are just pure evil. Yeah. But overall, the message as a whole is an evil message.
Right. Yeah. Even in the forgiving, generous interpretation of their actions, where they're just hucksters, they are preaching evil. You may just be a huckster, but what you're preaching is evil. If we're not being generous, then you'd be tempted to say these people themselves are also evil. And certainly that's how I felt about the two at the race to dinner. I thought those two women were just despicable. Yeah. I thought what they were saying was maybe the worst of anybody.
What's fascinating to me about the whole thing is this race hustle wouldn't work if white people didn't buy it.
Yeah.
Enough white people, at least. This notion of feeling guilty for racism committed against other races by the race that you share, somehow it conveyed some kind of like race guilt, even though you had no part in any of the racism. And often the people who are the ancestors of those who were oppressed by a form of racism, they themselves have not experienced that racism. Mm-hmm. But somehow this group identitarianism has so infected these people's minds that they readily just accept and absorb this faux guilt.
Well, and that's a good point, Thomas. One of the two women at the Race to Dinner. So Race to Dinner is this event where they pay these two women $5,000 to come tell a table full of white women how racist they are and how, like, what the special terms for their racisms are. And it's sitting down at dinner for 2 hours getting insulted by these women. And one of them was Sarah Rao, she was Indian, I believe. And her parents were immigrants from India. So it's not like she ever lived in America during the worst of any of the civil rights eras.
Nor did her parents.
Nor did her parents. So she's just purely engaging in this for some motive that I would probably assume is at best money, at worst wanting to tear down the culture.
Well, she says that America is a garbage America is a garbage country. She uses different words than I just did, and that it's irredeemable and needs to be burned down.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if anything, I will extrapolate. I might be reaching here, but I wonder if she's just assigning the colonialism to America that maybe her parents or grandparents or great-grandparents experienced under British rule in India. Maybe that might be where it's coming from.
I think there's definitely a part of it because that mindset is extended to the United States because the U.S. or the colonists colonialized North America, they would say. And, remember there was the mantra about recognizing that you're on stolen land and all this other stuff is part of that whole guilt complex narrative. And that recognizing history and that bad things happened in history is one thing. Presuming that somehow you are somehow culpable for those things that happened in the past before you existed it's a strange way of, I don't quite understand why. I mean, in one sense you could say this event that happened in history or this decision or this abuse that was done to these people at this time in history was wrong. Sure, we recognize that. It would be like saying Germans today are just as guilty as the Nazis were for the Holocaust, but they had no part in it.
Yeah.
It's just not true. And we can't hold them we can't go in and say, okay, guess what? We're going to have some Nuremberg trials part 2, and we're going to just put modern day Germans on trial now for the guilt of their ancestors.
Well,
we can connect them. If they had an ancestor that worked at one of the camps, guess what? We're putting you on trial for it.
Well, one of the biggest human rights, not civil rights, not any specific, just general human rights that we in our legal system in the West have developed is there's no collective guilt. It's individual guilt. If you do something, you are culpable. It's, to tie it to something that's happening right now, there have now been 2 assassination attempts against Trump. And every time anyone talks about it, they say, of course, the person who's committing the act is the only one who's guilty of this, which is true. But at the same time, they're pointing out that the news media is the ones who's calling Trump serious risk to our democracy every other breath. Serious threat to our democracy. And they're saying, despite the fact that y'all are saying that, the person who did it's the only guilty party, but also shouldn't you mind what you're saying? The point being, only one person can be guilty of one person's crime. And so what Hitler did can only be held against Hitler. It can't be held against anyone else in Germany.
Well,
unless they participated actively.
Right.
And
there's a collective that can be guilty for engaging in or furthering crime. I mean,
yes, if you're an accomplice to the crime, you can be held guilty.
Right. Often, the mafia is a classic example. Organized crime, where the boss isn't necessarily directly pulling the trigger or engaged in the murder of certain folks or even the theft or other things like that. Yet he is guilty of those crimes that are committed under his, authority. So to have him charged as part of that crime syndicate is legitimate. But what we're talking about here is not even just collectively immediately. We're talking about generations ago. Somehow the sins are the guilt somehow rides down with the generations. It has kind of it has that tone of original sin that we have within Christianity, right? Our Adam and Eve sinned, and their sin corrupted the human race, and so that the entirety of the human race now is under that corruption. So you could say inherit in one sense that guilt, but we are not individually personally responsible for what Adam did, but we've inherited the result of that. And so we by nature have a desire to sin and do sin, and then we're responsible for that.
If I could add one thing to what you're saying, Thomas, I think a key element of that whole idea, of original sin and, we are fallen. And if you apply to the DEI idea, the singular missing item is grace.
Yeah. Yeah. There is no redemption.
There's no redemption. And you can try as you might, but you will never be able to redeem yourself. You are expected to redeem yourself. And it is you who has to do it. Nobody can save you.
Yeah.
You have to do the work.
You have to do the work, that's the phrase they use throughout the movie.
That's you do the work. And it's devoid of grace. It's devoid of mercy, of humility.
Well, it's devoid of actual possibility for reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like when they're asked, when can I be not a racist anymore? Well, you can't.
Yeah. And they never define the path for even mitigating your racism. When they say do the work, that's all they say. They don't ever explain what the work is. Matt Walsh has to try to come up with a path on his own.
I think that the if I would want to use this word, the genius behind this DEI narrative is once it can convince people that they are somehow guilty of racism, it doesn't matter. That's the winning point. They just getting people to admit that they've won.
Yeah.
That's once they get that, then all people are left with is this burden and trying to figure out how to deal with the burden. And they'll say, we'll help you deal with the burden. But the number one rule is you never get rid of the burden.
Yeah, it's like going back to our last episode where we talked about Gnosticism. Gnosticism teaches that the flesh part of your being is inherently corrupt, and that there's nothing you can do to escape that. And that's exactly what they're doing with racism. They're saying because of the color of your skin, you are inherently racist. Because of your society, you're inherently racist. And there's nothing you can ever do about that. But you can,
but if you're
feel
not
bad
doing
about
anything about it, but if you're not doing anything about it, then you're even worse.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a self-defeating argument from the very get-go, and yet what it does is that people don't want to be the bad guy, right? And they want to be virtuous. They want to say, well, how can I do something to so that I at least mitigate this problem, not make it worse? And so then they offer them, well, here's some things that you can do, like when at the end of the show, which I think was probably actually some of the hardest stuff to watch, honestly, was when he does his whole class or DEI, what did he call it? A session or whatever.
Yeah. So Matt Walsh has gotten his credentials. He's talked to everybody, and then he actually hosts and goes through it with a bunch of white people himself.
Hands out whips for self-flagellation.
When it got to that point, I was like, and I thought, what? Part of me was like watching him get to that point, because I wonder if he was expecting once he did that, it was so over the top, everyone would leave.
Yeah.
And the fact that people still didn't leave.
Some people did leave a few times throughout the event, but there were people left always.
But the fact that not everybody left by the end, I almost felt like he was going, oh my goodness. It almost looked to me like that's why, when he stops it at that point, he says, oh, okay.
All right, we're done.
Basically.
Yeah. Because at that point, he's literally handing out whips and paddles to people to flagellate themselves with. And they seem like they're going to go along with it. And so he stops before they ever actually do that.
That has got to be like the same thing as looking at the Germans and wondering, okay, are they going to do this? Okay, are they going to do this? And then, like, if you went back in time and pretended to be Hitler, and then you're just like, oh my gosh, they're really going to do it. It's the same moment of the human mind going down that path of group destruction. I imagine it might have been terrifying for Matt to see.
I bet. Well, for me, one of the saddest parts of that scene is one of the people who's attending his class. Matt has his, I don't know if it's actually his uncle or if it's an actor, his uncle. He has some guy who's allegedly his uncle come up so that they can all verbally abuse him for being racist. And they do. But this one woman who's at the event talks about how she's cut off everyone she's related to from her life for being racist, including her parents. And that's what they want you to do. They want you to completely separate yourself from everyone who can rescue you, become an island, and then fall for their their evil, evil message so that you're constantly feeding into it and never trying to break free. And that woman maybe has cut herself off from anyone who can save her. And it's terrible.
That's what cults do, by the way.
That's a point I was just bringing up. It felt like a cult at that point. It was getting to a point where the level of abuse that is being promoted or these people are expected to bear up with, obviously emotional abuse and verbal abuse and what didn't come to physical abuse, but they're expected to embrace it unquestioningly.
Yeah,
that is the cult-like aspect of it that was just so distressing. And the fact that this anti-woke messaging has taken over so much of the country and so much of academia. Mm-hmm. The people who are supposed to be the smart ones have bought this stuff hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing, Matt Walsh, and I'm not sure how that worked, but as we try to wrap up here, I'm just trying to get this point out. He goes on news programs as this DEI educator, and it almost seems like, did he edit himself in here? Because it's so over the top ridiculous, which is intentional from him. But the fact that these newscasters are just going along with it is crazy. And that's what it is the media, and everyone goes along with this stuff. And so for us, the three of us, we work with this stuff every day. We know about this stuff. We hear about the worst of it when it happens. And then we see the progression. And so none of this was really shocking for me. But I think if you're someone who doesn't know all about this stuff, this is going to be a great movie for you to watch to see just how bad this stuff gets. And these people in the movie, the DEI anti-racist educators, are not exceptional in the things they believe. They are the norm for this group. And it's
what I was thinking, part of the way as I was watching it is I was trying to say, okay, how would I, as an advocate, at least maybe not the most extreme elements of this, but the concept of it, how would I respond to this film?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I thought immediately was, well, this is showing an extreme wing of DEI that actually is not what is a poor representation of actual DEI. But I think the thing that blows part of that up, at least, is the fact that he's got Robin DiAngelo, who is
author of White Fragility.
One of the queen of DEI in one sense, you could say.
Yeah, it's like the Bible for anti-racism.
Yeah, near the beginning, when he's first starting his journey of anti-racism, he goes to a bookstore and asks, what are the best anti-racist books?
Right.
And the authors of those books are many of the people he talks to. Sarah Rao, Regina Jackson, they wrote one of those books. Obviously, Robin DiAngelo wrote the most famous one, White Fragility. So these are the actual spokespeople for this movement.
Right.
It's not being overblown.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that the vast majority of people who aren't, although it's impacted businesses and culture, and we talk about, Disney having gone so woke, that this is exactly what you'd see in Disney. Mm-hmm. I can imagine in the board or the behind the scenes there in Disney, this kind of talk. And I think because this stuff is being exposed for what it is, I think that's why you're seeing more of these companies ditching it, which is, we've talked about this, and this is a good thing. I mean, and when you see a film like this, it exposes this is DEI. No wonder companies are like, whoa, no.
If you haven't heard about companies ditching it, one of the companies that adopted this stuff and then recently ditched it was Tractor Supply.
Yeah.
So that should be the touchstone for you. Like, oh, it got to Tractor Supply. This stuff is everywhere.
Yeah, they're in the gates.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Well, I think people finally recognize they're in the gates. I think the question of, I think what mystifies people, and it kind of still even mystifies me, how are people so susceptible to believing this narrative about themselves that when you first hear, the first time I heard this stuff, I'm like, how is that not just blatantly, obviously racist? Mm-hmm. That's racism. Yeah. You're taking one group and saying, because of what you look like, you are bad. You hate other people. And
not just bad, but worse than me. And that's exactly what Regina Jackson says at one point. Matt gets everyone at the race to dinner, all these white women, raise a glass if you're racist. And Regina Jackson raises a glass and then she's like, oh, I'm not racist, and lowers her hand. So she's actively saying, not only are you bad for the color of your skin, but you are worse than I am because my skin is a different color than yours. Which that is the actual dictionary definition of racism.
Yeah, clearly.
So, all right. We've talked a lot about the movie. There's other things we could bring in, but I don't think we need to. I think our message is probably you should watch this if you're interested.
Yeah, sure. We don't want to give away too much of the plot.
Right. And I think all of us had laugh out loud moments.
Let me say one last thing.
Yeah.
I think on the other side, Matt also interviewed just some regular redneck dudes in a biker bar. And a couple key takeaways. Most of these people hadn't heard about any of the language and the whole DEI stuff. One of the guys said, you know what? If you're black, you should be proud to being black. If you're white, you should be proud for being white. And you know what? It matters being a good person. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you look like. He said, my daddy was a Klansman. This guy. And I think that really, and this is my takeaway here, was how far we've come. Because his daddy was a Klansman. And this man's saying it's okay to be black or white and be proud of who you are and be friends. And he has friends. And that's about the content of your character and not the color of your skin. And his father was a Klansman. And so we've made that much progress in a relatively short period of time. And this whole DEI stuff is threatening that progress and threatening the goodness of our people.
Well, I think to your point there, I think because they also interviewed, poor blacks down in New Orleans and had the same they were receiving the same
almost
message.
Word for word, the same message.
Which is the thing that is powerful to me about that is that the culture that changed and the change that was desired where, Martin Luther King Jr. was seeking. And everyone, if you talk to most people and you say, well, what is one thing from Martin Luther King Jr. from one of his speeches? What's one thing you remember? And I think most people say, judge people not by the color of the skin, but by the content of the character. That is like in a nutshell, when people think that's his message, that's his message.
Yep.
And what DEI is doing is saying, okay, he said that, but no, we reject that. We're going to go this other direction. And I think that what the powerful moment for those two scenes is it shows you that broadly in our culture, that message has been accepted and believed and is what how most people see the world, which is exactly what you want. I thought the lady just pointing and said, well, we cut you and you bleed the same. And that's exactly the same thing that the black guy says down in New Orleans when he's talking about him. And he's like, well, we bleed the same. Yeah. And that's exactly, we're human beings. Just because we have different colors of skin doesn't make one superior to the other or one worse than the other.
Yeah. And that's what we should all believe because that's the truth.
Yeah. Yep. And so that was a very positive takeaway. And I think exposing this grift for what it is, and it is a grift, it's a money-making scam for some folks. Some people actually believe this nonsense, which people believe all kinds of different nonsense. This is one of the ones that unfortunately, and hopefully it is dying. I think it is as it gets exposed more.
Well, it's certainly on the edge. It may not be dying.
Yeah. I think there's a political element that they didn't really get into in the film, which I understand. But I think that political element is probably one of the biggest reasons why it still is. Yeah. Because identity politics is what drives.
Well, it's how the Democrats built their coalition.
Party. They emphasize identity because their policies aren't linear. Most people don't like their policies. There's some policies they do like, but most of them they don't. And so in order to get people to still support them, they drive the identity. Well, you are this, so you should vote this way. And that too often for a lot of folks wins the day. Yeah. And it's unfortunate. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. So anyway, our final two questions that we always ask, I think we should ask them now. First one, is this movie woke?
No.
Yes.
I would also say yes.
Yes and no.
It's very woke. It's got extreme woke messaging.
Well, it has exposure to woke messaging.
Yeah. Yes.
It has woke sermons in it, but they are deliberately being mocked. So
sure. Yeah, sure.
It's like a vaccine.
Yeah. It's a real vaccine though, not like a COVID vaccine.
Yeah, I like that take. Yeah, a vaccine.
Yeah. All right. So that's the first question. Is it woke? Sorta. And the second question is, how would you rate this movie out of 10? Thomas, let's start with you.
Just as a movie goes, I would say I'd give it 7.5.
7.5.
It was well done. It was, like I said, I think it would be shocking and maybe make it more interesting to people if they weren't familiar with this as much as I am. Yeah. And so when I walked through, I was like, it was well done. It was well put together. Some of the stuff got a little bit too slapsticky or too almost cringy, like you were saying. And I was like, I wasn't enjoying it. But there were definitely moments I laughed out loud. And it is more comedic oriented than his first movie. What was it? What is a Woman?
Yeah.
I think that one was more serious. This one is a little less. I'm going to give it 7.5.
Okay. Andrew?
I think I'll give it a 7, 6.5 to 7. And not that it was bad, but just mainly because of the cringe factor. It was a little bit hard to watch sometimes. And I do think that What is a Woman was a superior film to this one. I would say the format is very similar as far as the approach and how he created the film and the whole journey idea of the character journey, going through asking questions, interviewing people, etc. It was distinctly different insofar as he disguised himself this time, which was hilarious, but also very cringy at times. I didn't feel the same satisfaction of a really solid answer. He did give a good answer at the end of the film, but my opinion is that it could have been a little more serious and succinct than the way he presented his speech at the end, saying this is what all this means. So 6.5 to 7.
Yeah.
But I would still go see it. It's worth seeing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So this is the tricky part for me, because for me, the cringe stuff it makes me literally want to crawl out of my skin. I can't stand it so much. For the cringe factor, I rate this movie 1 out of 10. I despise that. But for the messaging, for the conversations you can have about it, there are laugh out loud moments, the editing, the music, visuals, it's quite good on all those respects. The cringe is a really heavy factor for me. I just cannot stand that. But I think you should go see the movie. I do like the movie, so I'll give it a 6. And that's all the points off are because of cringe. Every one of the points off is because of cringe. It really bothers me. But it's a funny movie.
Right. I would say that production value, this might be the best one from the Daily Wire I've seen as far as the overall production value.
It was good production.
It was well done. The music, the pacing, for the most part, I felt like, when we did, what was the Daily Wire's Lady Ballers?
Lady Ballers, yeah.
That one felt like it needed to be reproduced. It just wasn't quite. This one, I didn't feel like there was parts that needed to be cut out or they went, it's what I'm saying, I guess, is I think they're getting better at this.
I agree with that. Yeah. I do think they're getting
fair
better.
Take.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to both, the Snow White movie, and I don't know when the Pendragon cycle starts.
It's supposed to be this year. I'm guessing like December at this point. Maybe they've delayed it and I haven't heard.
Yeah. And that doesn't actually bother me that if it's taking this long to get it out. To me, that tells me they're really putting in the work.
And I think they've been working on this one for a long time already.
Putting in the work, Thomas.
Yeah.
On that note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas Sterling and Andrew. Today we discussed Am I Racist? Matt Walsh's new movie. The Pop Culture Contrarian is brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let us know what you think. Leave us a comment, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.